Right, well, we are at 2 minutes past, so I suggest we kick off. A very good afternoon to you all, and welcome to this webinar, which is titled Putting AI into Action, Making Data Work for Businesses. I'm Usman Ikhlaq, Program Manager for Artificial Intelligence at techUK, and I'll be chairing this discussion. techUK, as many of you know, is the UK's technology trade association with over 1,000 members, the majority of whom are startups and SMEs. We also do have a sizable large organisations in membership too, some of whom are on this call. To provide some context, this webinar is part of our Putting AI into Action webinar series, where we look to identify the barriers to AI adoption, potential solutions, and ultimately to showcase some thought leadership. So very much looking forward to this discussion. A few house rules before we kick off. So as mentioned, this session will be recorded. Attendees obviously will make sure their microphones and cameras are turned off, and we will also field some questions at the end. So please do pop any questions into the chat, and we'll certainly field them towards the end of this session. For this panel, I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by a very fantastic set of speakers, which include Emma from the law firm TLT, Bharat from KPMG Consulting, Sam from Ocado Technology, and Simon from BJSS. And I might just pause to allow each of them to introduce themselves, and if possible, to ask them what successful data looks like for businesses, very briefly. So Emma, I might kick off with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Usman. Hi, everybody. So my name's Emma Erskine-Fox. I'm a managing associate at TLT, as Usman said. So we're a national full-service commercial law firm, and I sit within our tech, IP, and data team. My particular specialism is data protection, and as you can imagine, in recent times, that's increasingly becoming data protection and AI, because the two are very much linked. And I suppose, you know, to pick up on that question, you know, what does successful data look like for businesses? I guess in my view, successful data and successful data governance is about the balance between kind of, you know, making the most of your data, but doing so kind of within the bounds of the legal and regulatory regimes that govern compliance, and looking at those regimes as a facilitator of innovation rather than a barrier to innovation. So that's kind of my initial 2 cents. But yeah, really happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Great, thanks, Emma. Bharat, I'll go to you next.
Thank you, Emma. Hi, everyone. I'm Bharat. I look after our clients in the financial services sector as a CTO for FS, but also look after and run our capability for data and AI engineering. Usman, to answer your question in terms of what good looks like, when I talk to and work with my clients, there are 2 things that really stand out for me. One is kind of access to data and the scale. What do I mean by access to data? Because for most of our clients, data is in disparate systems, some super legacy to modern systems. How do you get access to that data in a way that doesn't compromise the availability or performance of those source systems? And then to be able to do it, do whatever you need to do with that data once you've established trust and governance in it at scale. So doing small proof of concepts in organizations is super easy, particularly if you are sitting on top of a source data. But then to be able to take that data and do scaled implementations across the enterprise is what good looks like for my clients.
Brilliant, thank you. And Sam, I'll go to you next.
Hi, everyone. Absolute pleasure to be here. So yeah, my name is Sam Lloyd. I'm head of data at Ocado Technology. I run a data team cross-discipline of around 70 individuals. Ocado Technology, I guess, is a very data-driven business. So I can talk like from personal experience around what does good look like in terms of good use of data. For those of you that don't know, obviously UK panel, so most people should be aware of Ocado the grocer, but behind the scenes of Ocado the grocer, we've got Ocado Technology, which is essentially the powerful solution that uses robots and high density storage grids to pick and pack basically a customer order in less than 5 minutes. So you can really imagine that a lot of that is driven by data, and how do we leverage data to improve our product roadmaps, what we focus on, and also build predictive models to help actually inform the performance and more effective use of our products. So yeah, it's basically data at the heart of everything we do, and without these things that we're delivering from my team, the business would really cease to function as a viable entity, right? So it's quite an interesting way to think about the world.
Brilliant, thank you, Sam. And last but not least, Simon.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Simon de Timary. I head up our data and AI services for BJSS, which is a UK-based, privately owned technology consultancy. We've been around for about 30 years, and we have more than a decade of experience delivering high-quality data and AI services across both public and private sector. My own background is in AI and in innovation, and I've been responsible for growing our data practices and defining our data and AI strategy for a number of years now. So more recently, and ever since OpenAI opened Pandora's box, I've been going back to my roots and really focused more and more on AI, which I can see Bharat smiling. I'm sure is the case for a lot of people on this call. So really focusing more on how we help our clients understand and get ready for and adopt AI. And for me, successful data is data that supports organizations to achieve operational excellence, facilitates improved decision making, and enables AI. And I think organizations really start to have a chance to be successful when data becomes a strategic priority at board level.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon, and thank you to all of those for your introductory remarks. There are obviously many webinars out there with relation to data, so I think we're very much keen to sort of add something new to the conversation, try to shift the dial where possible. So very much looking forward to the conversation today. I suggest we sort of kick off with the first question. Again, it goes without saying that data quality is important for accurate results, and governance is really important to ensure that data is integral, stored in the correct way, processed, and so on. I do want to ask the panel, why is data, including data quality and governance, important for organizations with respect to AI? So we'll start by unpacking that. Emma, I might turn to you first. I know there's a big piece around the importance of input data. However, output data is also equally important. And I know that although data can be integral, the quality can be quite high, but there can be some issues related to that in itself. So very much sort of keen to hear your thoughts on that, and I'll yield the floor to you.
Yeah, sure. Great. Thanks, Usman. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I mean, when you come back to that sort of basic question, why is data important to AI? I mean, AI can't exist without data, right? It's fundamental to AI. You need data to train it. You need data for the testing and for the validation. You need data to operate it, right? The whole thing is based on data. And there's a fairly old saying now, I suppose, which is garbage in, garbage out, bad data in, bad data out. If the data that is going into the system isn't of a high quality, isn't good data, then the chances are that the outputs you're going to get out of that are not going to be useful either. And that kind of goes, that's from a sort of perspective of the data that goes in for training, as well as the data that goes in and for the kind of operational use of it, I suppose, as well. But I think in this conversation, there is often a big focus on the input data and the quality of the training data and things like that, and the accuracy of that data. And that is really important for all of those reasons that I've just said. But you're right, Usman, I think that the conversation around output data is equally important, because the fact that you have got good input data doesn't necessarily mean that the data you're going to get out is going to be good, or is going to be unbiased, or is going to be helpful to you. There was an example quite a few years ago now that I saw. I think I saw it in a TEDx talk, actually, where somebody was talking about a US AI algorithm that was used to predict recidivism, so predict the likelihood of offenders reoffending. And all of the data that went in was accurate. There was no question around that. There weren't, none of the data fields being used were anything to do with race or anything like that. But the outputs that were coming out were still biased. And when they looked into it, it was because the postcode that was going in was acting as a proxy for race. And so you look at the input data for that, and you wouldn't on the face of it think that there was any problem with that, because it's accurate, right? But the output was still biased. And so I think when you're having this conversation about the importance of data and data governance, you need to look at it from both of those angles and make sure that you've got the right governance to kind of control what's going in, but also that there is governance around what's coming out, and that you're doing that sort of ongoing testing and monitoring and auditing to make sure that what's being churned out, regardless of what's going in, that can be as accurate as you like, but you still need to make sure that what's coming out is right, because they're not necessarily one and the same.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Some interesting thoughts, and I suppose when we sort of think about AI, it's really important to ensure that there's increased trust, and there's obviously a trust debate, and we did run a webinar on this some months ago. And I suppose if the outputs are flawed, ultimately it will undermine overall trust in AI for an organisation. If you sort of get it wrong, it's very unlikely that it will be deployed at scale going forward. So I think it's a really, really good point to make. From Bharat, I might turn to you next. I know you've got a few points with respect to sort of scale and implementation, but also what sort of risks need to be navigated. So I'll hand over to you, and yeah, keen to hear more.
Thank you, Usman. Some really fantastic points made by Emma there. So I think just building on top of why data is important and what are the key challenges. Maybe if I answer that question with an analogy, if you're driving on the motorway, you want your car dashboard to tell you exactly how fast you're going, what's the engine temperature, etc. And if that data is incorrect, you could be going 170 miles an hour. Now, most people will be able to tell if they were going that fast, but I kind of exaggerate to prove that the accuracy of data is extremely important, particularly if any of our colleagues here on the webinar are from regulated industries. You understand the importance of that, whether you use that data to make credit and lending decisions, to do KYC, to do onboarding, to approve customers, potential customers for products, to detect vulnerability and to handle that effectively. And so therefore, I think that trust in data, having right access to right data is super important. That could be internal data, external data, structured, unstructured, as well. And to Emma's point, I think systems that were built, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago were probably based on this nature of our society at that time. But our society has evolved. We are a much more diverse society, and therefore these algorithms that we're building need to reflect that, and whether that's in data, also the users that we are testing these with, having a diverse team that is working across a number of these key things is important. The final point I'd probably make is around, you mentioned scale. So there are two things that really are key challenges for our clients. One is access to skills and talent. Everyone is in the same talent pool in terms of getting access to people, and some of these skills take time, not just from a build perspective, but from an operational perspective as well. Your colleagues in the ops team need to know how to operate these new shiny tools that the front office is building. And the second aspect is to do it at scale. So if you build these tools in AI and particularly Gen AI based models in production today, it is extremely challenging to validate those manually. So, and particularly if you have scaled businesses, you just do a simple maths where you could be validating just 10% of those samples on a month-by-month basis. It might take you 10 years to validate just that sample set. Therefore, you then need tooling to validate the models that these are predicting, producing, and so you can over time detect trustworthiness, explainability, and drift of these models as well. So I'll probably pause there.
Brilliant, thank you. And the skills, conversation is obviously another sort of key barrier to AI adoption, and I think it's really sort of important for organisations to recognise that it's no longer that sort of remote black box piece of tech confined to IT departments. It's going to be deployed across teams, across functions. And I think being able to explain what AI does to non-technical stakeholders is really key, and I think we've certainly seen conversations go in that direction too. So yeah, thank you for that. Sam, I might turn to you next. I've only got a few points with respect to specific use cases and, again, understanding what specific data sets relate to. So yeah, I'll hand over to you, and yeah, keen to hear more on that and anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Some great points raised already, obviously. It's a fantastic question. It's reasonably simple, the question, right? Obviously, data quality is important if you want to do AI, because you can't do AI without data. But there's a lot more, I guess, nuance that we can dive into from there, right? So you can do it without data or particularly good data, you just can't do it particularly well. And how do you know you're doing it well or not is a completely different matter. The use cases one I always think is fascinating, right? So there's a fantastic stat that I'm sure many of you have heard, which is, whenever you build a model or you have an analyst kind of pull some work and represent that back to the business, 80+% of their time is literally spent sourcing that data, cleaning that data, understanding the lineage of that data, and then literally 10% of the time is spent actually doing the effective value-adding work that they've spent ages in their careers kind of building up the skill sets to be able to deliver, and then the last 10% is communicating that, right? So if you can do anything, because these are expensive, really highly qualified, well-paid resources, right? If you can do anything to reduce that 80%, to be able to master your data, to be able to come to decisions faster, to be able to democratize access to that information, then you're going to massively 10x how effective you are using data to start with. So yeah, that would be my point, is really view your investment in data quality as a strategic investment, and not one that is a line on a cost center, because it's so easy to say, oh, it doesn't create any value, it's just the thing that we do. We've got all these people over there, and now we've just got a really pretty data warehouse that we can't leverage from. But you use that as the foundational stepping stone for actually what can we now use this really good quality data for, and then making sure that you're telling that story back to the people that hold the purse strings, so that they don't just then see that as like an overhead or something to be cut.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam. Some interesting points, and I just want to note a few words that you used. I think pace, strategy. I think there's certainly a sort of a rush to sort of do something with relation to AI, developing a model, adopting it, and I feel like it does lead to a bit of an imbalance. It does sort of lead to prioritization, and I think getting the sort of fundamentals right is important. So, if you don't have the sort of requisite, management, sort of data management stuff sort of in place, ultimately it could lead to bad results, bad outputs, and ultimately, a sort of failure of strategy. So I feel like it does sort of definitely come back to that. So thank you. Simon, I'll go to you next. I know you've got a few points with respect to silo data, what that means for large organizations, and what sort of data governance can do, but I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, I was hoping to save a siloed point to the next discussion point, actually, because I think it will make more sense there. But I will talk about data governance a bit. I think my colleagues have all mentioned kind of all the real reasons for why data quality is important, and I do think the answer is in data governance. The answer is key to driving high data quality, to enabling breaking down silos, and really driving innovation in general. So as a service provider, I've seen a change in the perception of governance from interactions with our clients. It's gone from curse word of something we need to do and we're forced to do, and it costs a lot of money, to the key to unlocking real value and innovation. So we're seeing that proper governance does not need to follow that computer says no approach, but really should encompass guardrails and guidance for what people can and can't do. And then have robust and practical access controls to data, so that only people with the relevant need have access to that data. You've got security in place by design, by default, and all encoded. So it just becomes a matter of, do I need data? Do I have a legitimate need for this data? Yes, then it's easy to access. So I think we're seeing this more and more as becoming a strategic priority now, and that gets discussed at much higher levels in the organization. It's no longer kind of a data manager that wants to care about data governance, but it becomes your CDO or your CEO even. And to add to Emma's points around, the quality of data, in and out, data governance will also account for data provenance and ensure that data has been acquired ethically, responsibly, and more importantly, legally as well, which becomes more and more important today from a GDPR concerns, but also the EU AI Act, which has been released, and it has real teeth. It's not been tested, or not fully been tested, but if it proves to be the same as GDPR, it will hurt if you get it wrong.
Indeed, I do like that that point about sort of governance being able to drive innovation. It's not a bad thing. Sort of adds a level of certainty which organisations would certainly appreciate. So thank you for that. We're on time, which is good. So I'll move quickly on to the second question, which deals with key data challenges. So be very much keen to hear from the panel about what the key data challenges businesses are facing in 2024, and how is this stopping them from effectively leveraging AI. Bharat, I might start with you, if that's okay. I know you've touched on skills and talent and scale, but I know you've got a few more points as well. So I'll hand over.
Yeah, so key data challenges in terms of the ability to operate. Some of the challenges I see in this space are linked with the data stores quite often then become operational data stores. So if kind of over time, what I've seen some clients do is they will build data lakes of different sizes, and then for some reason, it might have been a good reason at one point, but I've seen these data lakes become operational systems. So they are used for real-time transactions that causes performance issues, scalability issues, and op-res issues. So I think from a data perspective, that's one issue. For larger organization, and I think data provenance Simon mentioned earlier, but data passporting. So how do you ensure that if you have global client base and you may be operating in 30, 40, 50 countries, that you have access to data so that you can better understand your customers, but there are regulatory, and Emma would be far more better positioned to explain why that is the case. But you can't just simply move data from certain countries to their rules and regulations that regulated industries and clients have to follow. So, and the other thing I kind of sometimes think and see is that sometimes the problem is real massive problem for our clients, and they don't know where to start. So ability to see the end picture on a PowerPoint is one thing, but then being able to slice it in a sequence of activities, working out dependencies, because data exists on infrastructure. It powers the applications that you choose, whether that could be homegrown applications or new emerging models that you're using. So choosing the right amount of data. I use this phrase where you could always slow down the fastest CPU in the world, but just simply by throwing more data at it. And you can see this throughout our history as we've come from just Moore's law, doubling compute power every few years, and yet we've slowed it all down by throwing more and more data and computational problems at it. So I do think that understanding that more data doesn't always mean better outcomes. It might be just incremental amount of attributes that you may need. So if you're using data for credit and lending today, for example, could you use 2 more attributes? And that may be the location where you're using your card. Maybe it is the type of transaction that you're conducting in corporate world. That might give you more insight about your customers, and therefore you can potentially move to a more perpetual monitoring models as well. So understanding what is the next data point that you need, not that I need the entire library of data sets, is super important, because that has commercial consequences, storage consequences, and then computational challenges as well.
Yeah, so some really interesting points, and I think at a time where organizations have sort of limited compute infrastructure, I think it's really important to sort of use data in the right way. And I did like the point that you made about where to start, and I think a lot of organizations are struggling to really get their foot in the door in some ways. And I think what we're sort of hearing from a few organizations is a sort of core piece of advice to sort of think big but act small. So as a business, identify 1 or 2 key issues that you face. Could be productivity, could be something else, and then ultimately produce this meaningful proof of concept, which will ultimately ensure that this AI project is delivered successfully. So focusing on the start but also the end. And yeah, I really liked everything that you said there. Emma, I'll move on to you next, if that's okay. We're sort of keen to obviously hear the legal perspective, and obviously certain sort of compliance challenges which may, in some ways, act as barriers to adoption, even though they are important. So yeah, I'll yield the floor to you, and keen to hear more.
Yeah, sure. And I have to say that as the data lawyer on the call, I was delighted that I wasn't the first person to throw out the acronym GDPR. So thanks, Simon, for taking on responsibility for that. But no, I mean, yeah, the kind of legal and regulatory and compliance angle is very much kind of where I come at this from. And that question around, what challenges are there in terms of data that organizations are facing? And I think that compliance side is a really key challenge. And I think part of the difficulty is that the legal and regulatory framework around AI, particularly in the UK at the moment, is fairly vague, and it's not. I think a lot of organisations, certainly a lot of the clients who I'm talking to, kind of aren't really sure what they should be doing. You've got the EU's AI Act, which again, Simon, thanks for being the first person to bring that one up as well. The EU's AI Act at kind of one end of the scale is this, very, very long, very prescriptive piece of legislation that, in my humble opinion, is a little bit overboard, is a little bit overkill. But at the same time, what I'm hearing from clients is that at least you know where you stand with it. At least you know what the obligations are, and you've got a clear set of things that you have to comply with. You've got some clear penalties and all of this. And I think what people are struggling with in the UK is that you've got this sort of patchwork of different regulators, but all potentially saying slightly different things and all responsible for regulating sort of slightly different aspects. If you think banks, I act for a lot of banks and talk to a lot of banks, and they've got the ICO, they've got the FCA, they've got the PRA, they've got the Competition and Markets Authority, they've got all these different regulators, and they have to then keep track of what everybody is saying about AI and make sure that in each of the little bits of their activities that are regulated by those regulators, that they are then complying with all those. And I think that can make it quite challenging to kind of draw together a kind of compliant framework. And I think the other thing that sort of sometimes makes legal and compliance a bit of a challenge is just this, this sense that it can be seen as a bit of a blocker sometimes. Again, talking to lots of clients about this, and there has been a real sense of some of our clients that certainly their businesses see the legal team as a blocker to innovation, and a sort of a step that has to be gone through and a hurdle that has to be jumped over. And actually, I was talking to a client recently who they had a mandate from way up above to implement at least 10 Gen AI solutions this calendar year. And actually, they were really struggling to meet that because the legal team kind of didn't have a sort of formal structure around how they were assessing these tools, and they were finding that actually a lot of the tools were really low risk from a legal and regulatory perspective, but we're still having to go through these kind of all these hoops, and that was really sort of slowing things down. So I think what they then did to address that challenge was they then implemented this much more sort of streamlined process with a kind of triage right at the start to identify headline risks and then work out what actually needed the full legal review. And I think that has helped them in a number of ways. First, it's helped them to meet that mandate, and they are now at 8 solutions out of the 10 have been fully implemented, so they're on track, which is brilliant. But also it has helped from the sort of perception side of things. It has helped the business to see the legal team as some, a part of the business that they can work with. And that's certainly how I have always tried to look at data protection and, legal and compliance generally is something that can help to facilitate innovation and can just help it be done in the right way. And it doesn't need to necessarily slow things down, but it's about it's why you kind of need the framework in place before you start looking at these tools, because if you sort of try and build it as you go, that's what's going to slow things down. Whereas if you have it in place, and then things can just go through that governance framework and through that process, and it just makes it much smoother. So yeah, sorry, I've waffled a bit. I'm probably gone a bit off tangent in terms of the actual question, but hopefully some of that made sense.
No, not at all. I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I'm not sure where to start. I think I do agree with your point about sort of the need for legal and regulatory certainty. I think it's quite it's a point which needs to be made a bit more. I would say the importance of legal and regulatory certainty as a key driver of business confidence, and that ultimately will lead to more streamlined AI adoption. And I think with respect to the EU's AI Act, I think you're right in some ways. It's there may be some challenges with relation to that, but it's quite iterative, prescriptive. Organizations know what the compliance obligations are, what the penalties are. So there's a level of certainty which, it offers an interesting case study. So yeah, thanks for that. There are some questions in the chat, and we'll certainly answer them later on. So please do keep them coming. Simon, I might turn to you next. Keen to hear your thoughts. I know that BJSS has done a lot in this space. I know that there's a few sort of initiatives, including data cataloging and standards and so on. But very much sort of keen to hear your views on this, but also the broader subject matter. So I'll hand over.
Yeah, absolutely. So to continue on the data challenges, first of all, just addressing Emma's last point. I mean, I've been in conversations with governance, data protection, cybersecurity, and legal teams, and if you get overly enthusiastic, then they just clamp up. There is really, the moment that the words AI are uttered, everyone becomes very scared. And I think you're right, the lack of a legal framework and legal uncertainty around what can and can't be done is just, itchy for them. So I think we're really, they need to be won over, and there needs to be more maturity in those parts of the organization which have the power to block without a vested interest in your success. So it's important to bring them on. So really, like, go back to the point on the challenges we're facing. So real challenge is the existence of quasi impenetrable silos in organizations, and we see this a lot in organizations where there have been mergers, where there's multiple smaller organizations that have come together. We see that a lot in the public sector, and there can therefore be a plethora of systems and deduplication of information among these systems, and that makes it really challenging for organizations to then get high quality data that they need to be able to build AI, data that's accurate, that's current, that's complete, that can be trusted, that is consistent across systems as well. and it's a real challenge because in order to be able to do AI properly, you often need data from multiple systems and data from different parts of the organization. So for instance, if you're a retailer and you're trying to optimize stock near real time, then you need access to point of sale data, you need access to stock data, you need access to customer data, you need access to supplier data, you need access to marketing data if you're running promotions, and you might need external data as well if weather is a factor, right? So that if that's all scattered across and you need permissions from different teams, there's no way to reconcile everything, especially if there is no consistency, no primary keys that allow you to repatch your data together. So I think that silo data is a huge challenge. And we're seeing as well that for organizations to kind of push past this, especially in the public sector. Last week I attended the Data and AI Summit that was organized by GovX, and I hosted a roundtable on data sharing across government, because it's quite clear that sharing data is the key to unlocking more efficiency across public services, which is a mandate from the government as well. So we need our public services to talk to one another, and in order to be able to do this, having a set of standards for how data is being shared, or how data is at least being presented across different organizations would be massively helpful. And that was really something that the attendees of those roundtables were sharing, as they didn't know where to start, or they're in the process of cataloging their data, and really they would rather do it once and write in a way that then is useful to other organizations. They want to learn what other organizations have done. So having better sharing of information across different departments, arm's length bodies, etc., would be really helpful. And then the other thing that the government can do is set up a sort of marketplace. And I know that there is some announcement about National Data Library that are being published, and I know it's also not the first time this is being discussed, and there's been initiatives in the past which have not necessarily been seen through. So pretty hopeful that now with the new CDO in UK government, we can see past that and enable our public services to become more efficient through data.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I suppose it sort of goes back to the data accessibility point, and I think at techUK, majority of our members are SMEs, and I think what we found is that there's increased demand to really develop advanced AI models, and being able to access large data sets is a sort of core challenge for them, and it's really hard for them to sort of keep up with the demand and the need to put forward something which is innovative and new. So yeah, thank you for that. Sam, I'll turn to you. I know you had a few points with respect to being able to ensure there's join up and bridging various teams together, being able to sort of communicate, what's sort of going on in the space and what AI is doing. So yeah, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I think the big thing for me is that there's two massive competing forces in business. One, you've got the strategic intent of we want to be better, we want to leverage AI, we want to leverage more with data, etc. And then you've got the underlying kind of cultural headwinds, I guess, and it's like an immovable object meeting a what's the phrase, an unstoppable force, right? But unfortunately, culture always wins in this case, and there's so much to do around thinking about changing the culture or enabling the culture to be more receptive and open to AI, and more just like outputs from machines that people feel maybe particularly protective over, since it might be treading on their domain of expertise or their jobs in general. So managing that effectively is definitely, I think, the biggest challenge when it comes to leveraging data-driven decisioning and AI in businesses. Emma, you made a really interesting point about a client, and obviously I'm not going to kind of go into it in loads more detail, but you said that they have this mandate of 10 Gen AI use cases, and that kind of got me thinking that that's a really seems like a very arbitrary number, and it kind of almost says that the board or whoever kind of said that was what we need to do doesn't really care about leveraging data in its correct. I'm sorry, I'm not rubbishing your clients, but just like
no,
quite an interesting concept that you said, because you shouldn't just think about it as like, well, we need 10 examples of this. You should be thinking about it in terms of, well, where does it add value? Where does it make sense to do it? And how do I then prove how it adds value? Not just, I've done 10, we're good. So I think
sorry,
but I think Simon and I will take 5 each. That's no problem.
But it's a really good point, Sam. And actually, I was reserving that point because there's a question on the panel in terms of what would you would recommend to a business starting out, and I was going to kind of loop it in if we got to that question. But as it's been raised now, I was thinking the same as you were talking, and I'll reserve judgment on that particular decision. It's not my decision to make, but I think that there is one of the things that I see all too often, I think, is people getting carried away and coming at this from the wrong way. They're going solution first. They're going, we need to do this. We need to, everybody's doing this. Everybody's doing AI. So we need to do it. And so we need to implement all these solutions, and we need to be using this tech. But actually, I always think that it should, generally speaking, it should be a bit more needs-led rather than tech-led. And I just think that, you need to identify the problem before the solution. And actually, I went to a really good conference last year, and somebody was saying there that actually he is an AI consultant, a freelance AI consultant, but he often recommends his clients don't use AI because he's like, actually, that's not the right solution. Your problem is this. You need some sort of automation solution, or you need something else, some other technical solution that isn't AI. Everybody gets so obsessed with AI, and it's not always the right thing. So I agree with you on that. It's an interesting mandate, certainly, that they've had.
Yeah, just add to that. I mean, to the point that Usman was saying, the key thing that's really worked for us is having people that can bridge the worlds of technical implementation and commercial requirements, and translate what actually this means this in this world. It doesn't mean a Gen AI model. It means we just need a heuristic or a simple model that skews out this, right? So having people that can talk fluently in both languages and compellingly lead that conversation and enable change, I think, is the key thing to unlock data value.
Thank you. Yeah, no, definitely some interesting points, and do love the conversation. I think a point was made about not this webinar but externally about the need for AI not to be looking for a problem, not to be a solution looking for a problem, but to actually identify what are the issues, and then to obviously use AI to remedy those problems. So I think that's sort of one key way to really navigate this hype cycle, which has emerged in recent years. So yeah, thanks for that. Which incidentally moves us on to the next. Oh, sorry, Simon, go for it.
Sorry, just to punctuate your point, Usman, I think for me, AI is an excuse. So because there is a lot of attention to it, and there is a lot of funding behind AI as well, the way I approach is AI is an excuse for transformation. AI is an excuse for making things better. So we will, AI can be a part of pretty much any solution. It doesn't mean it's the right solution, but it can pretty much be applied to almost every challenge today. So what I try to do, and what we try to do at BJSS, is we come in, we try to identify the areas where AI can help with a specific problem that our clients ask, and then we use that as an excuse to say, look, we've created an AI-powered solution. The fact that it's only 10% of the solution, the rest is process changes, a bit of automation, a new API we've written, and just data that's in the right place. That is just, it still helps the organization, and we use this as an excuse because it is funding to make things better.
Yeah, definitely. Right, so we'll move on to the final question, the final segment of this webinar, which is on sort of collaboration. So what can organizations and the UK government do together to resolve data quality and data governance issues? So yeah, a lot of pressure to solve this, and hopefully we can try in this session. But Simon, I'll hand over to you. I think you've got a point about data sharing, and I know that you touched on the marketplace earlier in the session, but yeah, keen to hear from you.
Yeah, I think to go more pragmatically onto it as well, sharing data across the government is hard for a plethora of reasons. One of them is around legal challenges, the fact there's no legal framework, no data sharing agreements. Setting up a data sharing agreement between two organizations often takes 6 months because there's a lot of back and forth. There are no people that are empowered within the organization. There is no framework that covers them for sharing information with another organization, unless very specific, like HMRC and DWP have very good frameworks to share data. They've got very good reasons for sharing data, and that is quite smooth. But then when a smaller agency wants to get access to data and would make their lives a lot easier, that is very painful, very complicated. So again, having better guidelines from the government, having better coverage, having ministerial coverage, often for a mandate that is actually provided to the agencies, outlinks, bodies and departments for doing this, and then setting data governance in such a way that it's easy to request access, that the onus is on the person requesting the access instead of the person granting the access, because there are these guardrails in place, would make things easier, would provide everyone with kind of the comfort that they can do, that what they're doing is right, and that they're allowed and entitled to do it, because it's clear, because the guidelines are very well articulated.
Definitely, I think just sort of go back to that accessibility point, and it's quite interesting how some organisations are looking to synthetic data to essentially act as an alternative or a supplement, and ultimately the sort of broader conversation about that, and how it could sort of be used in place of real world data to generate results. So yeah, I think that's definitely another conversation. Fab. Emma, I'll hand over to you. I know we've touched on the legal and regulatory side of things, and obviously, various consultations are taking place and the need to engage with regulators on a wider scale. But yeah, I'll hand over to you and keen to hear more.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think for me, what it comes back to is that point around the kind of regulatory certainty and this sort of uncertain landscape that we're operating in a little bit in the UK at the moment. And, there have been, the ICO particularly has said a lot about AI and has always been quite kind of forward thinking in that respect, and has got lots of guidance around that, which is, generally speaking, really helpful. So that's kind of a good starting point, I suppose. But I think that there still needs to be, particularly for organisations that are regulated by more than one regulator, there needs to be a greater level, I think, of collaboration between the regulators on this, and some, like for the financial services sector, for example, some, cross-regulator guidance coming out from the FCA and the ICO would be something that I think would be really, really helpful, so that organisations know that, those are to use Simon's word, those are the guardrails, that's what they can operate within, those are the obligations, these are the things that they have to put in place. And I think, that there is something that organisations can do in all of this, which is to engage with those regulators as well. That you mentioned, Usman, there have been a number of consultations that various regulators have put out. I think the FCA has just opened another one as well, and the ICO has done a few, which I don't think they've got any open ones right now on AI. But even outside of those consultations, that doesn't mean that people have kind of missed the boat to make their views heard. And I know we speak to the ICO a lot, and I know that they're always really keen to hear from people as to what their particular challenges are and where they feel that guidance and support from the regulators would be most helpful. So that would be the kind of message, I suppose, from my perspective as a takeaway, would be to engage, to speak to those regulators. If there are areas where attendees feel that there is particular need for clarity, then don't sit there in silence on it. Do speak to the regulators, and be talking to them and making your voice heard around that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's good to sort of see the sort of Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum, the DRCF, working very much in this space and willing to sort of engage on a sort of cross level front. So yeah, completely agree with you on that. Sam, I'll turn to you next. I think you've got a few points to make. I think you sort of touched on apprenticeships to a certain extent in a previous discussion, but I'll yield the floor.
Yeah, I mean, data is hard, right? If it was easy, everyone would just be doing it and everything would just be lovely and swimming along nicely, even with the advent of, Gen AI applications and ChatGPT, right? So there's obviously more to it than just kind of opening up a browser and typing in, ChatGPT into it. But what can you do to really demystify that, to enable? And I think if you've got the apprenticeship levy, if you've got access to that funding that you obviously have to pay into, you've got to use it or you lose it, then why not use that to upskill and demystify some of it, right? Especially, we've been seeing so much success internally in our business from finding people that have got really deep-seated domain knowledge, but potentially don't understand, the world of data and analytics and AI, and giving them that powerful kind of frame of reference or paradigm shift to start to kind of combine domain and then new kind of age skills to unlock it just becomes like their superpower, right? So it's not a tool here that's going to take everyone's jobs and put everyone out of business. It's a tool here to make things much more effective and to supercharge stuff. So my culture point would be, to change the culture, you need to educate, knowledge is power, etc., and use your apprenticeship levies. I would focus on unlocking that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that having sort of calls in recent years to reform the apprenticeship levy in some ways, and there's an untapped potential there, which needs to really be secured in some ways. So yeah, thank you for that. Perhaps I'll move over to you. I know you've got a few points about collaboration between key stakeholders, not just between industry and government, but other stakeholders too. So yeah, keen to hear more from you.
Thank you, Usman. So look, I think on the point of collaboration, if you are a large business and you have multiple global businesses or perhaps functions that are distributed around the world, there's the tool that you need is conversations. Being able to talk to your counterparts in those countries, in those business units, and actually just having a conversation about what are you doing about data, what are they doing about data, what's the problem that the business as a whole trying to solve. You can't beat that human-to-human connection and establishing that joint trust, because where I see collaboration not happening is where there's lack of trust between individuals, and that then puts the guardrails are up in that instance where they perhaps don't need to be up. And then we kind of come out of the industries and maybe look at governments. Now, if anyone on the call kind of has heard me talk, it'll be a mess if I didn't mention open banking, open data in this call, because that's what I go on about on LinkedIn. Because I think that's a great example, despite whether some people believe in open banking or not. It is a great example of demonstrating that when you bring multiple bodies together, and that in the case of open banking a few years ago, it was the banks, the fintechs, and then eventually there were consumer groups and the regulatory bodies as well. We are the only country in the world that has produced open banking standards that are being adopted by the top banks in the UK and actually now globally as well. So most of my clients that outside of the UK have taken the UK standard, and 98% of it is still the same. They just changed bits of it and used it. And the most recent smart data bill, which will extend open banking into open finance separately, but also your energy data, utility data, etc. So you can think about in government, and when you're driving this change at a national and international level, you need industry participation. You need governments to come together. You need legislative bodies to come together. You need consumer groups. Because ultimately, it's the end customer, as a citizen, as a consumer account holder of a bank, or as someone who's paying the bills for utilities, they need to feel comfortable sharing their data. So understanding who's the actual owner of this data. Just because you have access to my data doesn't mean you're the owner of that data, right? So understanding that. And there's some really great example in Australia, for example, how they started with the consumer trust first, and that kind of changed the perspective of the country. Then I think the other thing that we've not fully touched on today is the ESG angle, and quite often, I don't just mean the environmental impact, but more data, more computation, particularly when we're talking Gen AI, can be very, very power intensive. And some of my clients are already thinking about, okay, what does this mean for my carbon footprint as well? So go back to the points that have already been made. Do you need AI, traditional AI? I call it traditional, stuff that's been around for 10, 15 years. Or do you need Gen AI? And if so, is that really needed? Just to Simon's point earlier, think really hard about what's the right architecture and solution here. Social aspect, and Emma touched on an example at the very beginning of this call around how if the data lacks social attributes of representation of the society, etc., you will get poor outcomes, and they are sometimes really hard to reverse or have consequences on individual lives. And then the governance aspect. Just on the governance, there's kind of the example kind of the spring up in my mind is, I'm sure many colleagues on this call have children or nieces or nephews. It's a bit like you're organizing your Lego in separate boxes, and there's a 5-year-old nephew behind you who's kind of messing them up again. And if you don't continue to organize them and catalog and organize your Lego, you will eventually stand on these blocks and feel the pain. So I think this is not a once-in-a-time exercise. It is a continuous exercise to the point that it is your target operating model is touching people, process, and tech, and it's a circle that kind of goes round in that sense.
Some interesting points, and I do sort of like the inclusion of consumer groups, because I think sometimes when we talk about collaboration, we sort of do forget about the actual consumer, the customer, and what is their needs and how can we sort of try to ensure that it's always at the forefront. So yeah, thanks for that. We are a minute ahead of time, which is good. So I might maybe just before we open up to questions, maybe just ask each of the panelists to give one key takeaway from this session. If it could be one piece of advice, what would you give? Yeah, hard one to think about. But should we start with Sam? Should we start with you?
Yeah, sure. One key piece of advice. I think everything we just talked about sounds incredibly, maybe a bit daunting, and in some cases a bit dull, like regulatory frameworks, and but ultimately there's loads of power and interesting stuff that will come out of playing around with data, and thinking about its actual value additive kind of use cases to your business. So don't let that put you off in any way, shape, or form, and just crack on with it, and get stuck in, and you'll never know what you learn, right? But if you don't do it because you're standing offish, then you're never going to leverage it. So that would be my takeaway.
Great, thank you. Simon, should we go to you next?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I guess I'm going to take Sam's point in a way. So just keep things simple when dealing with AI. AI does not need to be sexy. It does not need to be a fancy solution. It's been made orders of magnitude easier with the advent of Gen AI. But you need to set your expectations on that. It looks amazing. It looks like it can do everything. It can't. Be okay with it doing very simple things. It will move the dial and focus on that first, and then make it more complicated gradually over time. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Great. Thanks, Simon. Emma, we'll go to you next.
I love both of those points. I think those are brilliant. I'm actually going to go back to something, Sam, that you said in, I think, the response to the first question that I scribbled down, because I thought it was a really good point, which was around treating investment in data quality as a strategic point and as a strategic investment. And the reason I scribbled it down was because I think that is true from my perspective for investment in compliance, right? And I think that it is so often seen as a barrier, the kind of legal and compliance side, but actually investing in it up front and having those structures in place before you start getting too carried away with AI, those are the things that are going to make it easier and that are going to smooth that journey and that are going to make sure that it's not a barrier and that it works together with the business to make it a successful outcome, essentially. So I suppose that would be my takeaway, I think, would be to treat investment in data governance as a strategic priority, I think.
Great, thanks, Emma. Bharat.
Thank you. And just on the previous point about collaboration, I didn't mention academics. I wrote it down, didn't say it. So academics also need to play a key role in that. In terms of what advice I'd give, I'd say two things, open and collaborative mindset, and then execution discipline. Again, building on, effectively, if you don't execute with kind of structured approach to things, you might just go left, right, and center, and then you may end up where you want to be, or you may end up somewhere else. So having a very clear view on the business case, the business problems you're solving, and therefore what data do you really need that iteratively or kind of changes the landscape from other competitors is key.
Thank you. We'll move on to questions. I think I can see a few in the chat, so please do raise your hands, but we'll go to Francesca first. And the question is, what would you recommend to a business starting out? Who should be the first data hires? So I'll hand over to anyone who wants to tackle that one.
I'm happy to start. Fine, yeah, the start of an answer. It's not an easy question to answer because I don't know the business and I don't know what, who else exists in the business. But in general, with first data hire, you want to find someone who's a bit of a unicorn. They're hard to find, they're expensive to find, but we're looking at a hands-on data architect, I would say, someone who can both think big picture and help guide your strategic decisions as to how you do data, set your architecture and your designs, but also build the start of the platform and the solution. Again, very hard to find.
Yeah, and so yeah, unicorns. I would maybe just join in and just say don't just go out and just hire a data scientist and then just chuck them into the business and say do data because it's not going to work. That's like the fastest way to fail. So yeah, having a strategic view of what you want to do and how you're going to leverage it for kind of creating value is the first thing you want to create a framework for.
The other thing, so I'm assuming, Francesca, you're in that startup domain at the moment. So let's assume two scenarios where Francesca has just received £100 million funding, or she's just spending her own money that she's saved to start a startup. So I think in both scenarios, I'd probably start with hiring full stack developers, because what you want to do is actually build your product as quickly as possible, minimum viable product or whatever you want to call it, and be out there on the streets testing your product. Because only when you have tested the demand for your product can you then go and hire specialists, and that could be a cyber specialist, could be a data engineer or data scientist or whatever. So I think it really if you're in the startup phase, I'd focus on building a minimum viable product that you can test quickly within a matter of weeks.
Yeah, and just the only thing I'd add to that, I completely agree with all of that. I think the only thing I'd add to it is just to have an eye to kind of further down the line. One of the things that for me has kind of come out of this discussion, and Bharat, you in particular touched on it, is the need for diversity in this, and the need for diversity in kind of developing and implementing these solutions. And I think that's diversity of background as well as diversity of skill set. So I think it's kind of, yes, there is a starting point, particularly for smaller businesses. There is a starting point, which I think, that is absolutely the right starting point on the sort of more kind of architecture development side, or, data science, or, whatever. That's definitely the best starting point. But then, as that grows, to kind of scale that appropriately, there's going to need to be input from lots of different areas. And so it's just kind of having sort of half a mind to that as well. I appreciate the question was about the starting point, but having somebody in that role who is appreciative of the need then to involve others as the solution scales, I think is important too.
Great, thank you. I think there's one more question in the chat which has a sort of legal lens to it. So I think it's from Gavin. The EU has included a model size component in its GAI regulation, and the UK government has said it intends to do the same. Do the panel have any thoughts on this approach, and any advice to a business in terms of thinking about the size of AI models they work with? Yeah, very legal question. So yeah. Emma, any thoughts on that? Or
I was going to say, I saw the minute this one came in, I was like, this one's coming to me. I know, and it's not necessarily an easy question to answer. So yeah, so I think what Gavin is referring to, although Gavin, I think feel free to come off mic and correct me if I'm wrong, is in the AI Act there are specific provisions that apply to what they call general purpose AI models. So things like ChatGPT that could be used for all manner of things. And then beyond that, there is a concept, I think they call it high risk general purpose AI models, which is models that operate above a certain number of flops. And that's when things start to go slightly over my head in terms of the kind of some of the technical language around this. And they have kind of, that they are subject to much more kind of stringent obligations. In terms of kind of my thoughts on that approach, it's interesting. I talked about that on a panel to another conference earlier in the year, or it might have been end of last year. But either way, I agree that those types of models need to be regulated because they have the potential to get very powerful. My concern about the kind of UK approach of saying that they will only legislate in respect of those types of models is that it risks losing sight of some of the more day-to-day risks, which are the things that actually matter to people. And I think that's what we've always got to bear in mind. One of the things that I think the AI Act does really well, I appreciate I criticised it a little bit earlier, but I think there are some things it does really well. And I think that the kind of risk-based approach that it has in terms of setting out some types of models some types of AI systems that are high risk and others that are kind of more limited risk, I think broadly that approach is right. And when you look at the things that are high risk, they are all things that as a consumer, if your data was going into one of those models, you would want those to be kind of more heavily regulated. But they're not necessarily things that would fall within the, that, or certainly most of them are not things that would fall within that sort of general purpose AI type regulation. And so I do think that that's the risk that the UK runs in solely focusing legislative efforts on, on those sort of frontier AI, is another phrase that's used to describe them often, those sort of frontier AI models, is that it just loses sight of what actually matters to individual people when they're thinking about how they want their data to be used for AI. And in terms of advice to businesses, and in terms of thinking about the size of AI models that they work with, I mean, I haven't necessarily thought about it from that angle before, so I don't really have kind of an immediate answer to that. But aside from the fact that the larger the model and the larger the business that is providing that model, the harder it is to negotiate contracts with them on a legal level, and the harder it is to protect your business in the event that something goes wrong with that. And so that's just something to bear in mind, generally speaking, when you're dealing with big tech on any level, not necessarily AI. There's always a risk with that. But I think with AI, because of the particular risks that it brings, that does add another layer to that. Like trying to negotiate a contract with OpenAI, for example, you're never going to get particularly far with that. You're never going to get the protections that you want from it. And so I think that's just worth bearing in mind as well from a business perspective, just when you are dealing with those, which may not have been the answer that Gavin was hoping to get at, but I just those are my immediate thoughts on it. But others on the panel, do jump in if you've got anything slightly more coherent to add than that.
Brilliant, thanks Emma. Unfortunately, we're out of time, believe it or not. So the webinar's gone by really quickly. So obviously want to thank the panel for a very insightful conversation. We will have a recording of this session online along with a read-up. And I do encourage members to check out our AI Adoption Hub for future events. So there will be another webinar on the 5th of December on leveraging AI and also navigating regulatory developments. So definitely sort of legal lens that as well. So would like to obviously thank Emma from TLT, Simon from BJSS, Sam from Ocado Technology, and of course Bharat from KPMG Consulting. Thank you very much for your time, and on behalf of techUK, we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks everyone. Take care.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you.